Hi everyone, it's Ren here. Good to see you guys. Welcome to my room. I promised you last Thursday that I would follow up on this video I released on INFJs being underachievers, because in that video I provided some analysis of why it is that INFJs are underachievers, but I didn't necessarily go into the detail of how that can be either mitigated or bypassed or transcended, right? Because ideally we want to be in a world where, as INFJs, we don't underachieve, right? So perhaps the rules of the game currently are set in such a way that we are more likely to be underachievers than people of other types, but that doesn't mean that things can change. But we need to look into the ways that things can change and what we can do so that things can change. Okay, so if you're interested in this topic, stick around. If you like the video, give me a thumbs up. Don't forget, I have written a book on the INFJ type, The Ecstatic Soul. A sequel is coming soon. Currently, The Deepest Investigation of the Type. Get your copy below. You can also get a copy of my book, The Infinite Castle, a novel in the vein of that Kafka, Dostoevsky, Camus, existentialism, modernism, and the main character is an INFJ apparently. So if you're curious, support the channel. What supports the channel is also to click the Patreon link and support me. Even a modest sum every month helps massively when it's added up. Thank you so much to my supporters. Okay, so it's true that at the end of the last video on INFJs being underachievers, I think it would be fair to say that I left everybody in a state of mild despondency, not knowing what can be done. Like, are INFJs condemned? Yes, I'm having a coffee. I hope you don't mind, because I woke up earlier than usual and I had to run some errands, and I didn't get the time to get my coffee, which is why probably I look a little bit sleepier than usual. The underachiever INFJ, is he bound to, or she bound to be like this and to cope by means of some kind of sacrificial simile about being, unfit for this world, and this is my kind of fate and this is my curse kind of thing? Or do we actually want to try and be pragmatic about it, more pragmatic about it, and find ways that this can be addressed? It's not always easy to make that first step for INFJs, even though it's an important first step. And the reason why it's not easy to make is that pragmatic, right, as an adjective, it's a way of being. Pragmatic is not in the first place in the INFJ's repertory of words, particularly words for self-descriptions. It will be in the repertory of the STJ, will be in the repertory of the ENTJ, INTJ, probably like ISTP, ISFP also, in some ways a bit less likely, but possible. But for an INFJ to be pragmatic, it's not necessarily something that you would think of yourself as if you're an INFJ. In fact, when I provided or proposed that this, a kind of informal classification between three subtypes of INFJ: the pure processing INFJ, highly NI driven; the proactive INFJ with well-developed FE; and the analytical INFJ with well-developed TI. Among these three, the proactive INFJ would also be probably the INFJ who is most likely to accept the idea that pragmatism could be part of their repertory. But it's not the case of all INFJs. And so this is a first effort to make, this is something that actually really push in my new book, which is also why I'm really curious to see how you guys are going to respond to it, because a lot of the new book, I've made videos relating to different aspects that I explored at fuller depth, at fuller length and in fuller depth in a new book, like on spirituality, on love, on laughter, things like that. But first of all, it's much more deeply investigated in the book because obviously it's longer. But it's also, there's also like a running theme that's kind of undergirding all that, which I have not really addressed in videos because it's very difficult to address in a short format video. But the fundamental idea is that INFJs are meaning-making beings, that human beings operate, right, in the world, not just by way of having particular motivations and abilities, but also having, if you like, a language that articulates those motivations and abilities. And having a language, having words, having vocabularies, having repertories of self-descriptions can both limit and expand the domain of those possibilities. In other words, sometimes when you have new words for capturing something, you can actually come to understand that you have more ways of dealing with a problem than you thought you had within yourself. Sometimes the key was to put words on something that you hadn't quite brought to full articulation. And we know that with NI dominant, articulation is not always going to be a little bit of a struggle. It's always going to be a bit of a fight due to the inherently symbolic nature of what's being contemplated in the archetype and the metaphorical nature of the expression of what's been contemplated. So for example, I always use that example. I use it in a new book as well. It's like prior to this book, INFJs didn't necessarily think about their condition in terms of alienation or in terms of prescience, in terms of hazy prescience, haziness. Once you have those words, you have more of a narrative to weave around what you might do. First of all, to articulate your condition and make it meaningful to you as something that is unique to you or to you as an INFJ. That in itself is valuable, but also you can come up with ways to change your condition if that's your goal. Right? So having those words, having those concepts, so to speak. I don't like to use the word concepts so much because I think those words and those bits of language are much more full of life than concepts are. They're not abstract like concepts are. Nevertheless, it's similar enough in the case of the workplace. It's similar enough in the case of university. It's similar enough in terms of your work-life balance, if you like, because what I was talking about in my last video when I was saying INFJs are often underachievers. Obviously, when I speak of underachieving in the video, I'm referring mostly to career, right? And by career, we could have a somewhat broad interpretation of career encompassing both your studies, say post-school, so tertiary studies, like after from college onwards, and your internships, and then your full employment, your insertion into the job market. The idea was that INFJs are often underachievers because they're by definition holistic generalists, and whose strength lies in being able to weave together a comprehensive view of a whole domain versus being hyper-specialized, whereas our disciplines, whether they be in university, in academia, or in the workplace, due to historical forces at work, ideological forces at work, management being one of them, are heavily oriented, and they've been so for hundreds of years now. It's sped up in the last 100 years toward hyper-specialization. And so with the exception of, there's two exceptions, if you like, for INFJs. The first exception is the really intellectually limited INFJ. I was looking for a word that was not derogatory. Someone who's just not very cognitively proficient. Okay, we have to accept something, right? It's that INFJs are, on average, smart people, deep people, profound people. But there's, it's a Gaussian curve, so there's going to be some dumb INFJs, guys. Just like there's going to be some really gifted INFJs. But the very dumb INFJs and the very gifted INFJs, it's a Gaussian curve, so they're equally rare. All right? But they exist. Now, they're not the majority, but they exist. Now, the really limited INFJs, cognitively speaking, assuming that they're not so limited that they struggle to find work. They might find work in something manual or something that is, doesn't require a lot of studies. And maybe that's just what they end up doing, and the question doesn't arise. In the case of highly gifted INFJs, there is a subsection of these highly gifted INFJs, and I mentioned that before, that are going to be very gifted at, say mathematically gifted, or gifted in physics or the natural sciences, or maybe they will be very literally gifted or philosophically gifted, and they might just find their niche, and because they're gifted in a sense, that have more doors open to them, maybe they'll be able to be in academia or in a research center or whatever that might be, and they'll be able to do what they like and what they excel at. So that's possible. I'm not claiming that the curse that I'm talking about, the underachieving curse, is the lot of all INFJs. I'm saying it's a lot of a significant, a sizable enough section of the INFJ population and really deserves videos being made about that. So we're not including the very dumb and like those very gifted who happen to be very specialized in this highly technical discipline that they excel at, right? Because these INFJs exist for sure. Holistic journalists, right? Who it's interesting as well, because you can imagine a holistic journalist who's very good at being able to sort of bring together an entire context and say, okay, this is state of affairs, and we can derive performance indicators from that, because the world of management loves that. Problem is that holistic INFJs tend to often be oriented towards something that's much more theoretical, and it's like a visioning exercise, right? It's something that they are looking at in terms of the future. They have a sense of direction, so where a company should be going, or where an NGO should be going, what is wrong with what it's doing ethically, what is wrong with what it's doing in relation to this and that. But it tends not to be very kind of in the moment, here, fine-grained, we can turn this into a key performance indicator type thing. That's going to be more the lot of SI users or high TE users. INFJ is no SI, no high TE. So again, hard to translate into something that the employer is going to consider to be professionally valuable to them. Right? Is it going to be bring me money? In fact, it will bring them money if they listen, but they need to be patient and to have a broadened horizon in mind, which often is not the case, either because they're not smart enough or because they feel like the competitive business they're in doesn't allow them the time to. So for INFJs then, for the majority of us who are those holistic, futuristic generalists, right? Future-oriented, holistic generalists, unemployable, except maybe by a select few number of places. Employable only on the condition that we sacrifice that side of ourselves in order to specialize in something that we're not so into, or we do something that is not really aligned with what is our go-to. The future-oriented, holistic generalist approach. Listen. This is bringing us back to the notion of pragmatism, being pragmatic. INFJs don't necessarily like this word. They don't necessarily find this useful, but I think we really have to try to think in terms of being pragmatic here. I say it in my book, it doesn't make sense to sort of fantasize too much about grass is greener type scenarios, because most jobs are going to involve some compromises, right? So in a lot of cases, what you want to do is, in some sense, accept that you're going to have to engage in this kind of specialization that might not be exactly for you, but usually you're more than capable of doing it, right? I think what you want to be able to do is to come to a stage where you're able to articulate this activity that you're doing. It doesn't bring you complete satisfaction in and of itself. But again, you're a holistic journalist, which means that you function with a worldview, and an INFJ always specializes in making sense of their life as this whole framework, often with a driving principle. And then you have different parts that kind of are adjacent to each other and concatenate and can't really function without each other. If you can articulate a vision of what you want to be and have that particular activity that you're doing, which on its own does not satisfy you enough, if you can actually re-describe it, redescription, again, very important concept in my new book. If you can bring yourself to a stage where you can redescribe it as part, maybe a small part of something bigger that you see your life as making sense towards, you will see that even by the very fact of redescription, if you can successfully do it, you'll be able to relate to your job in a way that instills in it more meaning, because the meaning will no longer just be confined to the job itself. It will be also articulated and animated by this web that you have built, and it will make part of it. I'm sometimes reminded of the Buddhist who can have a completely regular job, but actually that makes perfect sense for a Buddhist because they can still be a Buddhist. In fact, the fact that they have a regular job and can be a Buddhist is intrinsically meaningful to their being a Buddhist. Think of this analogy to having what looks like an ordinary job or a very specialized kind of not generalist job in the world of work. That, of course, does not mean that you can't also avoid the world of, being a salaried person, having a wage. Of course, you can pursue, if you want, you can pursue a career as a priest. You can pursue a career as a psychologist, as a psychiatrist. You can be your own boss, but you just have to be aware that, like, if you're a freelancer, if you're your own boss, it comes with certain sacrifices as well. You're going to have to do, like, a lot of the admin that you'll have to do is something that you'll have to do yourself. There won't be HR people to do that for you. Everything comes with sacrifices, everything comes with compromises. But what I sincerely believe is that there's a lot of power contained in the enterprise of self-description and redescription. And as meaning-making beings, we're infinitely able to redescribe ourselves as INFJs, right? INFJs are repositories of potentially infinite descriptions. That's how we keep interest in our type alive. That's how we keep our type alive and the possibilities of our type alive and new and refreshed. Also the possibilities of these aspects of our lives that on their own might not seem to make a whole lot of sense or have a lot of meaning. If you successfully manage to integrate them as part of a web, you might just start seeing more meaning. Okay, let me know in the comments what you think, guys. If you want me to explore it further, if I haven't dug deep enough, let me know and I can maybe do that tomorrow. Or tomorrow I'll talk about something else entirely. All right, take care, guys. Bye-bye.